and welcome back to Through the Trapdoor. I'm Katie.
And I'm Emily.
And we're going to read Harry Potter fan fiction to you.
I am so excited. This week we're in chapter 10.
Of 13. It's
We're
like almost done.
So close.
It's like kind of sad, but like I'm kind of excited to start the next thing. Although we don't have something next picked yet.
Yeah, that's all right. That's why we're going to read you one-shots in between. All right, chapter 10. Here we go again. True to his word, the next day, Dudley picked up his mother from number 4 Privet Drive. To say it was a somber event would have been an understatement.
Well, yeah, she's leaving your father. Like officially leaving him.
Yeah.
Like packing up and going. Like that is a somber event. I don't care who you are. Like I do not come from broken parents.
It really is. Like, that'd be horrible. I also don't come from broken parents.
I know, but my husband's father moved away when he
True.
was really young, so I know how much it, like, tore him apart. And he's a grown adult. Like, it's still probably difficult.
It was obvious that Petunia Dursley hadn't slept at all that night. Her eyes were red and puffed up from tears. Dudley had barely gotten out of the car before his mother rushed to embrace him, clinging to her son for all she was worth. It was heartbreaking, to say the least, seeing his mother so upset. But Dudley tried his best to stay strong for her. Dudley hugged her reassuringly before loading her things into the car. Petunia sat in the passenger seat quietly, looking out the window at her house. "Mum," Dudley finally asked once he was back in the car, "are you going to be all right?" He couldn't bear to see his mother so upset. Even though he was still upset at his father for walking out on their family and hated him for everything his father had done, Dudley knew that his mother was still torn up about Vernon leaving. He may have been a bastard, but he was still Petunia's husband, and she loved him at one point. I think she still loves him, Dudley.
I really do. I mean, I would still love Nick even if he was an asshole.
Yeah, like, just because he can't
Accept.
accept,
That's the word you were looking
Yeah.
for.
even though he can't accept that your family has magic, you're still gonna love him.
Right. You loved him enough to marry him, and that's a huge commitment. Like, that's a lot.
It is.
To, like, promise to stay with someone for the rest of your life.
Yep.
Like, that's a lot.
It really
Also, it's really freaking expensive to get married.
Yes.
I would really only want to do that once.
Dudley had no right to judge if she still loved Vernon, but regardless, the separation had taken its toll on her. Petunia said nothing for almost 10 minutes as Dudley drove out of Surrey. For a while, Dudley thought his mother had just ignored his question and had opted for silence. But then, after a deep sigh, Petunia Dursley finally spoke. "I'll be just fine."
Yeah, because now you're with your son.
Yeah. And soon to be Harry.
Right.
Harry takes care of everybody.
He really does. Regardless of how you treated him at any point in your life, he will take care of you.
He really will. The tone Petunia used sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than her son. But as mother looked at her son, both knew that indeed she would be just fine. Passage of time. At first, Petunia's move into Dudley's house was tense. Both Dudley and Will had heard what had happened with Vernon over the phone, and being the good husband he was, Dudley told Diane why his mother was moving in so suddenly. The news that Vernon Dursley had walked out on his wife of so many years was shocking to say the least. Diane barely knew what to say to Petunia when she arrived, not sure if anything she said could cause the Dursley matriarch to remember her faithless husband. Will was torn between thinking that it was his fault for Vernon leaving and loathing his grandfather for being so hateful. The only one who had managed to bring joy back into the situation was Mari.
Way to go, girl. Like, always bringing that childlike joy in even though you were 8 years old and written like a 5-year-old.
Mari didn't know what Vernon had done to his wife and son. She only knew that her grandmother was visiting, which meant that she could get lots of sweets and hugs. Mari wasn't aware of the fact that not all people liked wizards. All she knew was that Gramps was living with them so she could make her famous chocolate chip pancakes every morning that summer. Mari didn't care that her grandfather was nowhere to be found. All she cared about was the fact that her grandmother was there. It only took about a week for Mari's infectious spirit to spread to the rest of the family. In fact, the entire month of June was spent enjoying Petunia's company. On days that Diane worked, Petunia would wake up early to make breakfast for her daughter-in-law, and then again for the rest of the family when they woke up. Dudley couldn't help but be proud of how much had changed since his father had gone. He could still remember when his mother had been so horrible to Harry because of his magic. Now Petunia was able to sit through any of Will's long-winded ramblings about what he read about Hogwarts or heard from Al. Of course, when Dudley had told his mother about Harry's children and their names, Petunia had gotten a bit more than just teary. "Lily?" she asked. "He named his little girl Lily?" Dudley had nodded and said that Harry had in fact named his daughter Lily. "What color is her hair?" The question had sounded odd to Dudley, but he decided to humor his mother and tell her that Lily's hair was red, just like her mother's. He hadn't expected his mother to burst into tears at the response. It was then that Dudley discovered that his Aunt Lily had red hair. And after reassuring his mother that the younger Lily's eyes weren't green like Harry's, but rather brown like Ginny's, Dudley began to tell her about their time at the Potter's house. Beside the slight wrinkle in her nose at the description of Teddy, Petunia seemed rather at ease with the magical world. "This was my sister's world, and she loved it until her dying day," Petunia had explained when Dudley asked her about her sudden acceptance. "And it was, and still is, Harry's world, and now that world has chosen Will. And I've never seen Will so happy about anything in his life. How could I ever try and keep him from it?" The month of June had gone by rather quickly, and the Dursleys had already gone into a new routine that had adjusted to the magical presence that Will had welcomed into the house. It seemed that every day Archimedes would land on their kitchen counter with a letter from Al to Will. After the first few times, Diane learned it was best not to have anything on the counter during those times. And every time a letter arrived, Will's face would brighten as he would eagerly snatch the letter and race to his room to read the letter and write his response in peace. There were even a few times when Mari would have her own letter to Lily that she would send along with Will's letter when Archimedes left their house. Yes, to them, it was a very normal life. It was near the end of July, and life was as normal as any family with a young wizard could be. Diane still worked, Dudley still coached boxing during the summer, while Will and Mari enjoyed time at home with their grandmother. To be an outsider, it might have looked like just any other family during the summer break. It was only when Will started talking about Hogwarts, or whatever he read about in the books that Al had lent him, that anyone would notice that something was out of the ordinary, such as the empty fireplace roaring to life the end of July, or the fire beginning to burn green instead of a warm orange red, or there being a disembodied head in said fire. To anyone else, it was an occurrence saved for a cheap horror film. To the Dursleys, it was just Harry checking in on them. Of course, Petunia and Dudley still flinched whenever the fire flared up the way it did. Some habits die harder than others. "Good morning, Dursleys," Harry greeted the family one morning, oddly chipper. Diane had already left for her shift at the hospital, so it was Dudley and Petunia sitting with the children when Harry made his call. "Harry!" Will exclaimed as he jumped from his seat, rushing to sit in front of the fireplace. "Mr. Harry!" Mari giggled happily, sitting on the floor next to her brother. Dudley couldn't help but chuckle. His children were acting so eager to see the fireplace. One would have thought it was St. Nicholas that was calling, not his cousin. "Good morning, Dudley. I noticed you didn't flinch as much today." Harry couldn't help but tease his cousin about Dudley's first impression of flu, when the Weasley boys had blasted their way from Dudley's fireplace. Dudley chuckled, knowing his cousin's teasing was all in good humor. One day I'll get used to it. You got used to being a father of a wizard pretty quickly, Harry pointed out, making Will and Mari laugh. Dudley nodded, knowing his cousin was right. True, the older Dursley man nodded. So what brings you to call on us so early, Harry? Yeah, is something cool happening? Will asked, almost leaning into the fire. Is there going to be a party? Or maybe we get to fly again? Or can we go in the car again? I promise not to scream this time, unless it's really scary. Or if there's spiders. I don't like spiders. They're icky. I always make Daddy get the spiders when they're in the shower. Mari! Dudley chuckled. Let Harry talk, all right, Pumpkin? He sent Harry an apologetic look. Harry chuckled. Lily likes to talk like that when she gets excited, too. But actually, Al just reminded me that we need to go school shopping. I almost left with him when Al reminded me that Will needed to go shopping also. So Al wanted to know if Will wanted to join us when we go to Diagon Alley tomorrow at 10. You're welcome to come with us as well, Dudley.
Well, yeah, Dudley would have to come. I mean,
It'd be awkward if you didn't take Dudley.
right, like, just Harry, Will, and Al going to get all his school supplies without his dad. That's weird.
That's very weird.
Bring his dad, Harry.
Yeah. Dudley paused. He hadn't even thought about how they were going to get Will's things for Hogwarts. Will had shown them the list of things he needed once, but for the life of them, Dudley had no idea where he could get a cauldron or a wand. Will, on the other hand, almost leaped through the fire at that moment. Really? Diagon Alley? I want to go too. Mari jumped up and down. I want to go shopping.
Me.
Well, Mari, we were just going to have us boys go, Harry started, but after seeing Mari's dejected face, quickly added, You know, Lily has been asking for quite some time to have a play date. Would you like to come over to our house and play while we go shopping? The disappointment in Mari's face quickly melted. Yay, I get to play! The young girl ran off quickly to try and pick out which toys she would bring. What's all the commotion? Petunia said as she made her way into the family room with a fresh batch of cookies in hand. Then she saw the green fireplace, and suddenly Petunia had lost all ability to speak. It wasn't the first time that Harry and Petunia had seen each other over the flu. They just couldn't seem to find the right words to say through their fireplace. For the most part, they simply stayed to formalities and keeping their answers short. Aunt Petunia? Harry? Petunia replied to Harry's greeting, sitting next to Dudley. Now, what's this I'm hearing about shopping? Dudley tried to explain. Will needs to go shopping for his school things, and Harry was asking if he wanted to join him and his son Al at Diagon Alley. Both Dudley and Harry stared at Petunia when she finished Dudley's sentence for him. Lily had to go there too. Oh, so you know it then? Petunia shook her head. I refused to go with them when she wanted to go get her things. I've never seen it. A pregnant pause filled the air. Would you like to join us, Aunt Petunia? Harry finally asked. Dudley looked from his cousin to his mother, waiting to see if his mother would actually go so far as to venture into the wizarding world. Again, the room was silent. Even Will knew better than to say something, just waiting for his aunt to answer. I would. A passage of time. It was safe to say that Petunia Dursley was a wreck the next morning. At least in Dudley's mind she was. On the outside, his mother looked just as composed as usual, but Dudley knew the telltale signs that she was worried or stressed. The most notable being the way she would purse her lips. Dudley never wanted to say anything to his mother, but he always thought she looked like a horse whenever she did this. And by now, Dudley was also very nervous. He had expected Harry to come with the car again and drive them to wherever Diagon Alley was. So when the same black car drove up, and it had been Ginny, not Harry driving, and it had been Mari she was picking up, Dudley was at a loss of how they were getting to their destination. It seemed like the only one not worried was Will, who was sitting contentedly in the family room, reading through his birthday book yet again. At times, Dudley couldn't help but wonder where his son had gotten his love for reading, because he certainly hadn't had such a gift before he became a wizard. The grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime 10, and Dudley began to wonder if Harry was running late. It certainly wouldn't be the first time a wizard had run late. The clock was finishing its last chime. Crack! Dudley almost jumped out of his skin when he heard the deafening crack, and he was sure his mother was close to fainting. But Will only jumped up. They're here! Dudley blinked, and sure enough, on a spot where there had been nothing but carpet before, now stood Harry, dressed in his wizarding robes. Beside him was Albus, holding his father's arm tightly. Dudley smiled at the affection Al was showing his father. That is, until Harry turned to Al and asked with all seriousness, "Are you still in one piece?" Dudley had thought Harry had been joking until Al readjusted his glasses. "I think I lost my eyebrow again." Harry furrowed his brow. Always the eyebrow. "Al!" Will shouted, grinning from ear to ear. Al smiled in return, happy to see his friend. Dudley, on the other hand, stared at Harry. "His eyebrow?" the blonde asked. Harry nodded, seeming puzzled. "Yeah, it's always the left one, though. I never am very good with side-along apparition." "Apparition?" Petunia spoke for the first time, staring at Harry. For a while, nothing was said between the two, just watching each other. Finally, Harry cleared his throat. Yeah, apparition. It's the ability for a witch or wizard to appear or disappear on the spot. Side-along is when you bring someone with you. Obviously, I'm not very good." Dudley was suddenly alarmed. "You won't be taking us by apparition, will you?" If Al had lost an eyebrow, who could say what Will or Petunia or even himself could lose? Seeing Dudley's worry, Harry quickly shook his head. "Oh, no. I wouldn't ever try apparating with so many people. Who knows what would happen? Don't worry, we're traveling a different way." Will laughed. "Well, it isn't by car. Mari just left in the car." Al chuckled next to him. Harry nodded. "And I know how you feel about flu powder, Aunt Petunia." Petunia gave him a small nod, not wanting to remember the day her fireplace had exploded in her living room. "And unfortunately, we can't all fly on broomsticks." Dudley couldn't help but ask, "Then how?" Harry smiled, as if Dudley had just walked into a practical joke. Slowly, the older wizard reached into the folds of his cloak, rummaging for something. The Dursleys watched in fascination. Even Petunia was leaning in to get a better look. Harry's hand had returned from his pocket, clutching a can of beans. Will stared at the can quizzingly. "Are we going to eat magic beans?" That would be my immediate... Oh, yeah. Will stifled a laugh as Harry smiled. "Not quite, but if you'll please place your hand on the can quickly, we'll get going." Almost as a demonstration, Al came to his father's side, placing his hand on the aluminum can. Slowly, Will put his hand next to Al's. Dudley and Petunia shared a look, almost daring each other to back out. Luckily, the two seemed to keep each other accountable as they both took a hold of the can. Harry took out a pocket watch, looking at the time. "All right then, we appear to be on time. It should be departing right about..." Dudley suddenly felt like he was being pulled forward, as if someone had attached a hook to his navel and decided to give it a sharp tug. A passage of time. Will hit the ground hard, his hands almost burying themselves in the dirt. He was not expecting such a sensation. What was that? He felt like he had been the rope in a tug-of-war match. A thin hand extended to him. Al smiled down at Will. "Don't worry, most people have trouble keeping their balance the first time they porky." "Oh, what now?" Will asked, taking Al's hand and standing up. A quick look around showed that his father and grandmother had also lost their balance. Harry was helping his aunt up off the ground, while Dudley dusted himself off. Al chuckled. "A porky, it's an enchanted object that brings anyone who touches it to a specific location. For us, that place is here." Will took a second look at their surroundings. He knew their destination was Diagon Alley, but he didn't think it was an actual alleyway. Maybe the shops are invisible? Or maybe he had to say the right words? Harry looked at Will's confused expression. "Don't worry, this isn't Diagon Alley. We're actually in London right now. Take a look." The older wizard carefully shepherded the Dursley family out into the main street of London. To get to Diagon Alley, you need to go through the leaky cauldron first. Harry winked at Will. Can you see it, Will? Will looked around the street that they were standing on. There were plenty of shops and pubs. None of them looked... Wait, there it was. It was secluded in a dark corner. Will almost hadn't seen it. But after seeing the peeling sign, Will eagerly pointed out the pub to Harry. Where? Dudley asked, unable to see the spot where his son was pointing. I don't see it. Are you sure you see it, Will? Of course, Dad. It's right there. Will jabbed his finger at the leaky cauldron as their party made their way across the street. Petunia shook her head. Will, dear, you must be mistaken. There's nothing there. The Dursleys turned to look at Al and Harry, who were trying to keep from laughing. What? Will asked, hoping his new friend and his dad weren't playing a mean trick on him. Harry chuckled slightly. Don't worry about that. But, Dudley, you'll never be able to see the leaky cauldron, and neither will you, Aunt Petunia. Al leaned over to Will as Harry was talking to his cousin and aunt. What Dad means is only our kind can see it. The leaky cauldron is spelled against muggles to keep them from stumbling upon it on accident. Dad just wanted you to do a bit of magic on your own. Will beamed at this bit of news as Harry led a very confused Dudley and Petunia into the leaky cauldron, Al and Will close behind them. The pub was dark, almost shady looking. Will knew that his mother would have never let him in here if she knew what it looked like, and from where he stood, Will could see several different witches and wizards looking exactly like he imagined they would look, some even scarier. From the look of things, it looked like his grandmother was about to faint. Al smiled. See him over there? Will followed Al's gaze to a bizarre-looking witch wearing what looked like bottle caps around her neck. She's an old friend of my dad's, a bit odd, but a very nice lady. At this, Will didn't know if he was supposed to be confused or scared by what Al said. As it turned out, Will wouldn't have much time to think about it. The group had barely been in the pub for 2 minutes when a particularly old wizard stood up, pointing a long, bony finger at Harry. By Merlin! It's Harry Potter! The words had barely left the old man's mouth before every head in the pub was turned and focused right on Harry, who was blushing furiously. Al groaned. Here we go again. Will stared at Al. Here what goes again. End of chapter.
Dang! What's happened?
I would 110% be Al in that situation. I'm like, Jesus Christ, Dad!
What the hell?
You should cover up your scar with something.
We've got all this magic, and you grew up as a muggle. Just buy some makeup. Like, come on, Harry.
Dye your hair literally any other color.
I don't know. I think I would still recognize Harry even without his scar. He is on Chocolate Frog cards now.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, like, dye your hair.
Or buy different glasses. Because I for sure think he's still wearing his signature round glasses.
Always. I mean, he's probably still wearing the same exact pair unless Ginny was like, dude, do something about your face.
Like, I love you, but come on.
Yeah.
You're in your 30s now. Step it up.
Step it up. Yeah, but anyway, so,
back to our conversation about Molly and Arthur.
Yeah, so I feel like Molly and Arthur definitely went to school before
The Marauders.
Before the Marauders.
Absolutely. I'm thinking they were more in Lucius's time because Lucius is clearly older than the Marauders would have been.
Yes, I think that they're probably very close in
because
age.
Technically Molly and Lucius are some kind of cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Because Molly's a Pruitt.
Yes.
That's her maiden name. Gideon and Fabian, her brothers who died in the war with Grindelwald, were Pruitts.
Yes. And what, so...
And she was old enough to have a relationship with them.
Mm-hmm. The war with Grindelwald, that was in what, like the 20s?
I think it started in the 20s, but I don't think Dumbledore defeated him until, like, the 30s and 40s.
Okay.
So let's say late 30s, early 40s. And so Molly's old enough to have had a relationship with her brothers. And we know wizards can live an exceedingly long time, since Dumbledore was in his hundreds when he died. And Voldemort was in his 70s.
Mm-hmm.
In his second year. So when Harry was 12, 50 years prior, Voldemort was a head boy. Not a head boy, but a prefect. So he was at least in his 5th year. And that's when Hagrid was a 3rd year.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's when Hagrid was expelled.
Yeah.
So if Hagrid was 13, 50 years prior to Harry's 2nd year, that makes him 63 in Harry's 2nd year. Which makes...
Yeah.
And Voldemort was what, 75, she said, when he died?
I don't think it was quite 75, but he was in his 70s. I think it was lower. It might have been 72.
Okay. But still, early 70s.
Yeah, somewhere right in there.
So that means Molly and Arthur have to be in their 50s or their 60s.
Well, I mean, that would make sense, because their oldest son is, what, 25 at least?
At least. I think Charlie's more like in his 30s. I think Bill is 25, 26. Because it's what? It's Charlie, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Then, is it Percy. I always forget about Percy. Because I hate him. I forget he exists. So, Percy was head boy when the 4th year? Harry's 4th year, so the twins' 5th year?
Was it 4th year?
No, because Percy was already working at the ministry, so he was head boy Harry's 3rd year.
Mm-hmm.
So the twins' 4th year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they have to be in their 50s or 60s.
Yeah. So I feel like the people who played them were accurately aged.
Yeah. Which means No. Voldemort would have already left school. I was going to say, which means she could have potentially been at school at the same time as Voldemort.
I think that they were after Voldemort.
But before Dumbledore took over as headmaster?
Yes.
Because he was definitely headmaster for the Marauders.
Yes. But I don't think that he might have been headmaster for part.
I was going to say, they could have seen the transition from Transfiguration teacher to headmaster when Dibbet retired.
I think at some point they talk about Professor Dibbet. So I think that they at least had him for headmaster for a year or two.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.
A nice one. And you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Through the Trapdoor 16 and on our Twitter at The Trapdoor 16.
Because Through the Trapdoor was too long for Twitter.
Yep.
And you can email us at throughthetrapdoor16@gmail.com with any story suggestions, or if there's anything you think that we need to see, whether it's a meme or another fan fiction, or if you have anything to say to us.
Bye.
Bye.